Hi, boys and girls. We're going to finish Mr. Louie Screwy. Chapter 11, My Genius Ideas. Okay, here's genius idea number 1. Me and the guys would hold a protest rally in front of the church and stop the wedding. Mr. Louie had told us that back in the 60s, kids were always protesting stuff. He said if you didn't like something, you could protest and change the world. I didn't like Miss Daisy getting married, so the best way to stop it would be to protest it. On the morning of the wedding, my mom said I had to wear a jacket and tie. What's up with that? Why do men have to wear dumb cloth around their neck? Whoever thought up that idea should get the no brain prize. That's a prize they give to people who don't have brains. I went to church with my parents. Ryan, Michael, and Neil, the new kid, were waiting out front. I told my parents to go inside and I would meet them in there. Okay, let's do this, I told the guys. The 4 of us formed a line and marched back and forth in front of the church. Down with love, I chanted. Love stinks. No more kissing, Ryan chanted. Kissing spreads germs. Stop the wedding. Girls have cooties, chanted Neil, the nude kid. We were hoping other boys would join in our protest, but nobody did. It was just the 4 of us marching back and forth. That's when Mr. Louie came out of the church. He was wearing a black robe. What's up, dudes, he asked. We're protesting against the wedding, I told him. You said if somebody doesn't like something, they should protest. Protesting against love is a bummer, Mr. Louie told us. Come inside, sit down. So much for genius idea number 1. It was time to try genius idea number 2. Me and the guys went into the church and sat down together. I have been to one wedding before. It was at our school when Mr. Klutz married a pig. But I don't think that was a real wedding because Mr. Klutz was already married to a human being named Mrs. Klutz. Mr. Louie stood at the front of the church. All the teachers were there. Mr. Klutz brought his wife, who wasn't a pig. Miss Cooney was there with some guy named Mr. Cooney. I hate him. Is it time? Ryan whispered to me. Not yet. My tie was choking me and I was really thirsty, but there was no way I was going to drink from the water fountain. Mr. Louie probably put love potion in that one too. There was no time to get a drink anyway, because some lady started singing Here Comes the Bride, that Here Comes the Bride song on the organ. Miss Daisy came from the back of the church and walked down the aisle with some old guy. She looked really pretty in her wedding dress. Then Mr. Mackey walked across the aisle and stood next to Miss Daisy. Is it time? Michael whispered. Almost. Dearly beloved, Mr. Louie announced, we gathered here today to join the groovy couple in holy matrimony. It was time. Okay, now, I whispered to the guys. This was my genius idea. We were going to levitate Mr. Louie. If we could make him float up in the air and out of the church, he wouldn't be able to perform the ceremony. Me, Ryan, and Michael, and Neil, the new kid, all closed our eyes and tried to levitate Mr. Louie. It's not working, Ryan said. Close your eyes, I told him. It doesn't work unless your eyes are closed. There was a problem. With my eyes closed, I couldn't tell if Mr. Louie was levitating. I couldn't levitate him with my eyes open. Is he floating? Asked Michael. I don't think so, Neil said. We need more love, I told them. We kept trying to levitate Mr. Louie for a long time. I concentrated so hard my brain hurt. When I opened my eyes, Mr. Louie wasn't at the front of the church anymore. Maybe it had worked. Maybe he had floated away. But then I saw him. He was coming over to us. Dudes, he said. What are you doing? I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do, so I had to think fast. We're just grooving on the love vibes, I told him. I can dig that, Mr. Louie said. Give me some skin. We all slapped Mr. Louie's hand, and he returned to the front of the church to continue the ceremony. That levitation thing didn't work at all, Ryan whispered in my ear. Do you have any other genius ideas? No, I'm out. Oh well, we tried our best. There was nothing I could do now. It was out of my hands. Mr. Louie said a bunch of lovey-dovey stuff at Mr. Mackey and Mrs. Daisy. He told everybody how they met in the teacher's lounge and fell in love. Do you, Mr. Mackey, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife? Mr. Louie asked. I do. Do you, Miss Daisy, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Is there anybody here who knows why these lovebirds should not be united in wedded grooviness? Said Mr. Louie. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I looked at Ryan. I looked at Michael. Michael looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Neil. Then they all looked at me. We could hear a pin drop. Stop the wedding, I shouted, standing up. Now everybody in the church was looking at me. AJ, my mother shouted. Mr. Mackey and Miss Daisy are not in love, I yelled. They just think they are. He only asked her to marry him because Mr. Louie put love potion in the water fountain at school. Everybody gasped. That was the craziest thing I've ever heard, said Mr. Klutz. Is this true? I was just jiving you, AJ, Mr. Louie said. There's no such thing as love potion. There isn't, I asked. What about levitating to school? Were you jiving about that too? Yeah, I was just yanking your chain, AJ. Don't flip your wig. I sat down. This was terrible. Do you realize what that means? There was no love potion in the water. It means I kissed Andrea because I wanted to. It means the love machine must have been right when I said I loved Andrea. I love Andrea. Ugh, disgusting. I thought I was going to die. Now I would have to run away to Antarctica and live with the penguins. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Mr. Louie said. Dude, you may kiss your bride. Mr. Mackey and Mrs. Daisy kissed. It was gross, but nice too. It was a real Kodak moment. Chapter 12, Happily Ever After. As soon as the wedding was over, I took off my dumb tie and ran to the water fountain. I really needed to get hibernated. Mr. Klutz had handed out bags of rice, and he told us to throw the rice when Mr. Mackey and Miss Daisy came out of the church. Cool. Rice fight, I yelled. Me, Michael, Ryan, and Neil ran around throwing rice at everybody. I nailed Andrea in the face. I threw some rice at that Mr. Cooney guy. Serves him right for marrying Mrs. Cooney. It was cool. You should have been there. We kept throwing rice until Mr. Louie told us to knock it off. Mr. Mackey and Mrs. Daisy got into a car. There was a bunch of cans tied to the bumper with strings. What's up with that? People who tie cans to their cars are weird. Finally, Mr. Mackey and Miss Daisy drove away. We all waved goodbye as the cans rattled on the street. I guess we won't see Miss Daisy or Mr. Mackey for a while. Maybe Mr. Klutz will forget to hire a new teacher and we can just have fun all day. Or maybe we'll just get a teacher who's even dumber than Miss Daisy. Maybe Miss Mackey and Miss Daisy will get divorced and everything will be back to normal. Maybe Miss Cooney will divorce her husband and marry me instead. Maybe Mr. Louie will realize that the 60s are over. Maybe Mr. Klutz will grow some hair so he won't have to wear a silly wig. Maybe an elephant will fall on Andrea's head and no one will find out that I love her. Maybe I'll figure out how to levitate stuff. That would be cool, but it won't be easy.